Noting the hour in the presence of quorum, I call this meeting to order. First of all, I would like to introduce our newest committee member. Sorry, mine went for a blank there. Greg, how do you say your last name?
Jarboe.
Okay, this is Greg Jarboe.
Greg Jarboe.
A long-time town resident with experience in anything you want to share? You don't have to.
I don't have to. The town will appreciate that I don't have to.
Okay. Thank you. Now that we've done that, I would like to invite anyone up who has citizens' concerns to share. Please say your name and address.
Members of the Finance Committee, good evening. I'm Mike Balulescu. I live on Maple Street. I'm also a teacher at R.J. Gray and a Marian parent, and as you know, I'm the president of our teachers union. At last week's school committee meeting, you heard the superintendent present two proposed budgets to the public. A B budget, or the budget in the event of a failed override, and an A budget indicating the school committee's budget in the event of an override, reflecting $2 million in cuts from what would be a level service budget proposal. As you continue to deliberate about what level of override you may ultimately support as a committee, I want to remind you and everyone else watching at home that after 2 straight years of budget cuts made out of necessity that were not in the best interests of our students, the school committee is offering up a 3rd straight year of cuts in an effort to acknowledge the fiscal reality our town faces. Despite growing, changing, and evolving student needs, despite the universal agreement across this country that students impacted by the pandemic have lagging social, emotional, and academic skills that must be addressed by our public schools, the school committee is still willing to whittle away staff and services because they recognize how serious their responsibility is to the taxpayers, even if it comes to the expense of our children. And yet, based on the feedback I heard at that meeting and the feedback I expect to hear tonight, I worry that our district will be asked again to go back to their spreadsheets and find more to cut based on voices from our community demanding more austerity. Now, I'm not naive to the political process unfolding before us, and I understand that reasonable people volunteering their time can disagree about how to make hard choices when funding is limited. But I'm here tonight as a taxpayer and a teacher, and most importantly as a parent, to ask you to take seriously the efforts our school committee has already made just to get to the A budget they proposed last Thursday night. Our district has already agreed to ask our teachers to, once again, for a 3rd time in as many years, prepare to do more with less. I've said to you before that your committee has tremendous power in this process. Voters in Acton give a lot of weight to your opinion and your evaluation of public spending. But with that power comes responsibility, of course. You, along with the rest of ALG, hold in your hands the fate of our school system. I don't believe it's hyperbole or propaganda to say that the decision you make in the coming weeks and the decision our voters will make at the end of April is the most consequential decision Acton will have to make in a generation. I am asking you, I am imploring you, for the sake of your own children, and for my children and for the children of our community, to help put an override number on the ballot that gives our voters a real choice to preserve much of what makes our school district great. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to our community.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, moving on. Julie Pierce from the Town Economic Development Department and Transportation is going to talk to us about some town economic development things that have been happening. Oh. We've all been given also a handout from Julie, just talking about some of the things for you to have.
Good evening, everyone, and I just also wanted to introduce Catherine Yusoff, who's the chair of the Economic Development Committee, and we work closely together. Before I get started, does everybody up here have one of these handouts? Great. And then I have a second question for you. Hi, Marianne. Who has seen on WBZ the most recent news clip featuring some of the economic development initiatives in Acton? I'll forward it to Christy and she can share it with the rest of FinCom. But basically, what I wanted to share with you guys tonight are some of the initiatives that I've been working on through economic development. As Christy mentioned, also, in addition to overseeing the Economic Development Office, I also oversee transportation. So you'll see some mention of that, but basically, what you guys should know is that this year, when you're looking at kind of that split, commercial versus residential, this is the first year in a long time that that split hasn't continued growing on the residential side. And I think that you can say that's a direct result of some of the initiatives out of economic development. And I wanted to share that basically under economic development, I have kind of two major strategies where I'm working with the community. So one is direct support for existing businesses. So for example, if someone comes in, they want a new sign and they're not understanding the sign bylaws, I will sit with them, understand what they want, help them understand what forms they need to fill out, who they need it to get it to, explain the bylaws behind or the rationale behind what they're being asked for, and then also touching base on the back end, working with the planning department or any other department to help make sure that happens. So that's kind of like a high-touch, intensive process. Aside from the direct support, I also engage in a lot of outreach throughout the community to existing businesses and also to bring in new businesses. So to give some examples in those two buckets, in the support for existing businesses, one of the first programs that I started was Acton Business Incubator. So basically, I successfully got some grant funding and used the funding to provide direct grants to small businesses, but I also use the funding and some of the connections that I have to create workshops for these business owners, things that would increase their capacity, increase their ability to function in our community, to thrive, and to stay. So that's one example. Another is the public arts program, which I started, and that's the program that was featured on WBZ recently. And hopefully you guys have all seen the mural in Kelly's Corner on the side of the building where Not Your Average Joe's is. So that was the first project out of my office. But we've commissioned other art pieces. There's two benches along Great Road, and more art to come. Another initiative is the Shop Small Holiday program. So that's like a co-marketing program where I'm amplifying what the businesses are already doing. And I don't want to read everything in this handout to you, but a couple really big initiatives were, one is just a permanent directory of all the consumer-facing businesses in town. Something that I noticed when I started is that even people who've lived in Acton for a really long time are not aware of all the businesses that are here. And so, again, another high touch, knocking on doors, making cold phone calls, showing up multiple times to build out this directory that now has over 400 businesses. Another large project that I worked on is a how to do business in Acton guide. Some of the things that happen, or the ways that towns function, is not the same way that businesses function. And so it's a very opaque process a lot of times to business owners. So it's a guide that gives them a starting point, whether they're starting a business or doing something where they're expanding their footprint. And you guys can read more about that, but switching gears to kind of the outreach and recruitment efforts, something that I want to highlight is the vacant storefront program. So this initiative actually started before I started, in the sense that it went to town meeting and the voters voted to support putting funds aside for the vacant storefront. Then I started And the next step was forming a vacant storefront district and getting that approved by the state. So that was successfully approved. And then the next step was recruiting a business to come to Acton. So that happened. So that's the Salted Soul Cave in the Acton Woods Plaza. So that's really exciting. So they went into a space that had been vacant for a few years, invested a lot of money in renovating the space. So great for Acton businesses and great for our community to have a new and unique type of business here. And then something else that I wanted to highlight is that I successfully got a grant to do some strategic planning to create a long-term economic development plan. So that's something that I'll be working on this year. And then finally, another thing that I've been working on these past few years is disposition of town properties. So we all worry about the tax base, we all worry about revenues. And so from my perspective, coming in and seeing buildings sitting empty, it's like a double whammy. Not only are we not getting tax revenue from the empty buildings, but also it is a depressing impact on the economy to have empty buildings that fall into disrepair. So unfortunately, the first building that we tried to sell was 3 School Street, and that was not successful at town meeting. And it's really sad, you know, if you look back at that proposal, which was great, and like the input that we got from the community, especially in light of now looking to cut millions of dollars from the budget, when if that had passed, it would have covered that shortfall. So that's an example of something that would be great to support. And then next up, I'm currently not trying to sell, but trying to lease out an empty space. So we'll see how that goes and see how the responses go. But that's another aspect of economic development, is making sure that we're using all of our assets and our properties for their best use. So I'll stop there and let Catherine kind of share some of Economic Development Committee initiatives.
Thank you, Julie. So we primarily support and really, in many cases, stand in for businesses, because many of our business owners and leadership in town don't live in Acton. So they don't have the right to vote as we do as Acton citizens. So the Economic Development Committee looks at, you know, we support Julie, so we look at Julie's goals, we look at the select board goals, and we really identify those things where we think we can help and represent businesses and really for the benefit of the town. So one of the things that I would like to say specifically to the Finance Committee is, you know, we have been really taking the perspective around sort of revenue generation in a sense. So we're not, our committee isn't really putting out things that necessarily cost the town money. So we're not putting out proposals that require investment, but we're really trying to think about ways that we can encourage new businesses, support existing businesses to help improve the revenue side of things. So currently we don't have a FinCom liaison to EDC, so that would be helpful to have a specific liaison. And what I'd like to see is if we could act more proactively in helping you with your work, getting more insight into some of the things that you have to grapple with, so that we might be able to work collaboratively together to really help improve the revenue side of the budget through our mission, which is to help to support and grow economic development and businesses in town. We try to do that proactively like we did last year, and I appeared here before you to talk about our warrant article to support a comprehensive economic planning effort, and that passed. It was non-binding, but it passed, and Julie's been able to get funding to support that effort. So that's a very proactive approach that we've taken, but we also do things that are a little bit reactive in the sense that we look at proposed bylaws and legislation coming down the pike, and we try to take the perspective of the business owners in town to see if any of those proposed bylaws might negatively affect businesses, and particularly small businesses. And then we would take a stance or come before the appropriate bodies to say that we don't think this is appropriate, or we might suggest some changes to the bylaw to make it a little easier for businesses to either comply with or to allow them to remain successful and stay in town. So that's a little bit about what we do, and thank you for hearing about the work we do. We love working with Julie, and we do what we can to support her, but we are, as you are, all volunteers. But our focus is on supporting business, and anything we can do, with FinCom, with a new liaison, to help improve the revenue situation, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Scott?
I just have a couple questions. One of the, when you're both talking through the development, one of the things I was thinking was, I feel like vacancy of storefronts is kind of a very common thing across many towns. Did you stumble across any types of metrics that could be comparable to Acton, where there's storefront vacancies, like stores, vacancies, storefronts per town as a percentage basis, and then compared to Acton? Like, how do we compare it to other towns? I know there's been a lot of retail build here, but I notice it because I live in the town, but I don't, in other towns, I'm sure there's similar situations. And I think just generally, I would expect that there's more places for businesses to go than there are places, more places for them to go than there are, I'm saying it, you understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying it well, but you understand. So I have two follow-up questions, but let me pause there to see if there's any metrics or anything.
I don't have any metrics with me, but it is something that I could share with you guys if you're interested. But in general, it is true. There's lots of towns, lots of cities are struggling with vacant storefronts. It's kind of two-pronged. Everybody knows about kind of internet sales is hard for a lot of businesses, especially small businesses. And then the pandemic kind of accelerated that in the sense that, of course, everybody was staying in, but also the pandemic was long enough that it changed people's consumer habits. So Acton is not unique in having vacant storefronts. I do think that there's things, some towns perhaps have friendlier laws in terms of what businesses need to comply with. But in terms of the vacancies themselves, Acton is not unique.
Okay, so you kind of led me to my next question. My next question is, what are the one or two factors that drive businesses to actually come here, when you must know that inherently? And then secondarily to that, if the budget constraints that are pushed on the town end up making the town less attractive, have you looked at scenario analysis to, if the town is somehow optically degraded from budget cuts and less attractive to invest in, how is that going to impact us going forward? And then my last question is have you reached out, do you do any work with the SBA? And those are all my questions.
Great. Okay, so you had your question about what happens, if Acton is downgraded, kind of optically. I think that something that brings businesses here is the community. They know this is a community that strongly supports the schools. They know it's a community that strongly supports having, green spaces, things like that. So if that kind of overlaps either with the customers people want or the clients that they would serve, it's a big factor to bringing businesses here. So, and also in terms of the employees that they would have. So, knowing in this area, not just Acton, but in this area, there's a good source of highly educated people for your workforce is another really attractive thing about Acton. So can I say there would be an immediate day one impact? No. Would we see an impact over time? I think so, yes. And then you also asked about the SBA. So I have collaborated, there's a rep for our region. I have collaborated with her on one event, and we do have plans to collaborate on an event this year as well.
Thank you.
Jason?
How'd you know I had things to say? First, thank you for coming and reminding us that we would be best served by having a liaison to your committee. We appreciate you reaching out to us. I remember that Mr. Majors was our long-term liaison to EDC, and honestly, shame on us for not replacing him when he stepped aside at the end of last year. So thank you for being proactive about it. Corollary to what Scott just asked, is there some kind of industry shift or industry best practice to pay attention to the fact that brick and mortar retail is probably, not gone the way of the dodo, but definitely harmed by the new reality of the world? And is there some kind of industry shift to experiential behavior, the jam times of the world, the other things where, Golf Galaxy, where you can't just order that online and have it delivered to your door. You have to be there in person to take advantage of it. That's the first of my questions. I have two more after that.
So yes, exactly. So, and I think you can see that even just in Acton's first vacant storefront, right? Not that she doesn't sell items related to her business, but it is an experience that you're going to as opposed to straight retail. So I think that is a trend that's coming. I think the other trend that I would love to get to work on in the future with Acton businesses is there's a growing digital divide where you have some businesses, those early adapters who have robust websites and robust websites that translate well to mobile and easy ordering through the app and things like that. And then there's this growing divide where there's other just small businesses who just, maybe they have a Facebook or maybe they have one thing and they're just not really out there. And that lack of digital presence is really hurting them. So you'll see that some of the things that I do, it's like when I mentioned the holiday directory, right? It's an amplification of what's already out there. So if you are not already advertising your holiday specials, what can I amplify, right? And it may sound really simple, but that exists here in Acton. You have businesses that are amazing at marketing, and you have businesses that they're just trying to keep their head above water, and they don't have it. So I would love to help address that digital divide.
Yeah, and I think I speak for the whole committee when we'd love to see more of the tax base come in on the commercial side than on the residential side. My two other questions. We have been told multiple times that one of the largest obstacles to restauranting in town is the lack of sewerage. But at the same time, if you look at Nagog Park, all of those lots are fully sewered. And multiple of those spots have struggled and failed multiple times over the last couple of years. How do you respond to that dichotomy?
I think it's two different questions, right? So one question is, how do we get more restaurants in Acton in general, right? Versus how do we get restaurants in the spots that already have sewers? So that's one piece. I think the second piece of that is looking at, okay, the restaurants that are there, are they restaurants that are falling into this category of this digital divide, right? Restaurants still need to advertise and get out there. Are they falling into that post-COVID consumer shift where people are going to go maybe to a trivia night, but not just to a restaurant? There's a lot of things there to consider. So in terms of a new person coming in who just wants to open a restaurant and they've picked it just based on, this is my favorite street, or I used to live over here. A lot of times when people are looking at starting a business, they don't look at things like, where are the sewers? And restaurants aren't the only ones who need a lot of water capacity. But it's something that I encounter a lot. So it's restaurants, biotech, and salons also all need that increased water capacity, increased ability to deal with chemicals. And so all of those are affected by the sewer capacity in terms of somebody saying, okay, I've looked at the demographics, I've looked at traffic patterns, here's where I think would be the ideal spot for my restaurant, and it's not always Nagog. Now, from those that are in places that are already sewered, or they are kind of were there first, so they get the majority of the capacity of that existing water plant, then you get into trying to figure out why that particular place is struggling. You mentioned the SBA before, so one arm of the SBA is called SCORE. They're all volunteers, the Service Corps of Retired Executives. So I do connect a lot of businesses to sign up for a business mentor through SCORE to kind of help them figure out like what is your specific issue so that they can turn things around and survive.
Thank you. Part and parcel of the sewer conversation, because I think barring state law changes, sewering, in my opinion, is a terrible idea. And I'll explain why in a split second, because it goes directly into your comment about the civil service building down at 3 School Street. That project failed because it was not actually economically advantageous. It offered one, if I recall properly, it offered one little coffee shop and a whole bunch of housing. One of the things that we tried to look at the beginning of this year as a finance committee is the real cost of new growth. And we got derailed very quickly by the override conversation, and we've not gotten back to it, much to my chagrin. When you take a look at a proposal, I ask you to take a look at it from a truly holistic perspective. Adding one coffee shop on the corner and a whole bunch of new housing does not move the needle on the ratio between housing and economic development and the commercial tax base. And so, as I recall that bruising hour and 15 minutes at the last town meeting, it failed because it did not move the needle from a true EDC perspective. So again, when it comes to sewering and evaluating any new program, please take a holistic view of it, including the true costs of new growth.
So I think that you might be misremembering the proposal. So it did have a lot of housing. It did have space for a coffee shop. What's different about, I guess that I would say maybe this is a nuance to you, but specifically about the offer to have a coffee shop, it was actually an offer to incubate a new business, whether it was a coffee shop or something else, where they would have not had to pay rent for a period of time, had mentorship, had the renovation and setup of the inside. So speaking of holistic views of, if I think of, say, businesses that have come in, they're renting, but they have to pay for their own renovations that they might do to a space. So say us, maybe you move into a house, you spend, $5,000 to spruce it up. These businesses are coming in and spending $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 on their space, and that prevents even just a coffee shop from being able to come into these spaces that need significant renovation. So that proposal included funds to cover that. In addition, that proposal included space for the food pantry to move from, right now, the Acton Food Pantry is actually in Boxborough, so it was space for them to come back to Acton and be centrally located. So I think that, I agree 100% with you for a holistic view of what proposals contain. But I think that in that holistic view, you need to think about what does it cost for a company, even if it's quote-unquote just a coffee shop. You need to think about how much it costs for a business to come and realize that those kind of costs are prohibitive for a new business to come in.
Understood, but isn't one of the main purposes of the economic development plan to shift the commercial versus residential tax basis? And wouldn't that proposal not have shifted it, other than the fact that we were taking one lot, and which is gaining no money at all right now, and then turning it into a larger mix of residential versus commercial? Is that not accurate?
I don't know, I mean, I don't know exactly who would move in there. So you're getting some property tax from the residential, and the question would be, how much burden is it then putting on town services? So I don't know what the exact, finances are of that. But an even bigger picture of that development is that we have been sitting in that situation, South Acton, for so many years. And it needs something to kick it off. And many of us felt like that proposal had the potential to sort of kick off something, increase a little bit the housing density so that you get more people in the area, have a developer who was willing to put in the expertise. The developer was taking on risk because he was saying, I will find the business that's going to be successful there, because if he didn't find a business that was going to be successful, it was going to be on him. So I think our feeling about that was even bigger picture, right, than what is the plus and minus on the budget of this development. But here's an opportunity for someone to assume some risk to potentially jumpstart development in that area that could, bring more interest to the area. So I think that's one thing. I'm also on the South Acton Village Action and Planning Group. One thing that we struggle in that area is, it's just going to be that way until we get something to jumpstart it, or a developer to come in and take over several parcels and implement a vision that's close to what we would like to see there.
I know we're getting cut off about to get cut off for relitigating something that happened in the last town meeting, so I'll go to my last point before saying a true thank you that I do really appreciate the concept of moving the needle more towards the commercial side. Don't know if this is at all possible in any way, shape, or form, but one of the things that I find distressing about living this far outside of the city is that nothing's open after 9 o'clock. And I would love it if we could have some kind of round robin where, one day a week, one of the entities in town agrees to stay open until 10:30, so we can actually have a drink at the end of one of our meetings, rather than everything's closed.
Do you mean 11?
At 9 o'clock. With FinCom, not select board. We've been keeping it to an hour and a half here.
Good.
So I worry that there's a chicken and egg problem there, that because nothing's ever open, nobody ever goes out late. Therefore, nobody ever goes out late. Therefore, nobody ever wants to stay open late. I would love it if there was some kind of voluntary round robin where it could happen. It might breed some kind of success. If after some kind of short period of time there's no uptick, then by all means let it die. If this is truly a sleepy bedtime community, let it be. And that's the last of my comments. Thank you.
Steve?
I'll try to be brief. What percent of our tax base is commercial industrial at this point?
It's still about 90-10.
Okay, so that needle hasn't moved in a very, very long time.
So this year, I think it moved to, it moved like 0.1%, which sounds like a small percent, but it is 0.1 of millions is still, yeah, it's the right direction. Yeah.
We've been talking about empty storefronts. We also have a lot of empty office buildings. If you go ahead with this economic development plan, how does the process work? What do you target to fill up empty storefronts and empty office buildings?
So what's interesting about working on a economic development plan, so the way the funding works that I got, it's to hire a consultant who specializes in that. So they'll kind of bring their expertise to fore, but we'll be looking at, what does the community want? Obviously, we know what FinCom wants in terms of shifting the tax base, but also looking at what are the employment trends, what are the industry trends, and then seeing, okay, from that bigger picture, which of these upcoming trends do we think Acton can fit into, right? So that's kind of the longer-term process, but a lot of, there'll be forums for public engagement, and FinCom will definitely be invited.
Okay. And so I'll give your new addition an opportunity to advertise to our vast television audience. What do you do in a salted soul cave?
So it's basically what it sounds like. It's
Well, it
there's
doesn't sound like
salt.
anything to me.
So there's basically like tons of salt all on the floor and the walls and the ceiling, and it's a place for relaxation. Salt is supposed to be anti-inflammatory, so it's a place for wellness, basically.
It doesn't stay open after 9, though, right?
Greg.
Yeah, I have to concur. I think my kids used to say there's no action in Acton. So one of the things that if, as the new guy to this committee, if you need a liaison, this happens to be an area where I might be able to bring something to bear. I am the co-author of a book called Digital Marketing Fundamentals, and I teach courses at Rutgers University and at the New Media Academy in Dubai to teach business people how to market on social media. So as a volunteer, I could give that stuff away for free.
Sign them up. Sign you up. I have one here. You're talking about town-owned property that we don't use. Morrison Farms has that nice house there that I think they should carve out a piece of it, set the lot up, Habitat for Humanity, and then get it back onto the tax rolls. Because right now, it's sitting there deteriorating, decaying, and it's not any benefit to the town, really. So I would love to see that, something deeper bug in the manager's ear. I've done that several times.
Keep it up.
Business Saturday worked great. We did some stuff with scouts and for that, and every time one of the bees needs to make sure they had tree flyers for our tree collection the last 2 weekends, that we always spent money. So it was very busy in West Acton during the holidays, and it was very good to see. So
Awesome.
that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other thing I was going to say, in addition to, what you were saying about getting things back on the tax roll, the longer the buildings sit empty, it just makes it harder for the next person to come in and purchase or lease, because it's just that much more work they need to get it back online, and then it becomes this bigger barrier. We got a ton of interest when we put out the RFP for 3 School Street. I've gotten a ton of interest for 1921 Maple Street. But sometimes when people arrive, they're like, oh. And, if I lease or if I buy this property that needs so much work, surely I'll be exempt from HDC. Surely I'll be exempt from, and it's like, no, you still have to follow all the same rules. And it just becomes a non-starter.
3 School Street brings up my concern about a lot of the EDC stuff we do around town. I'm an entrepreneur. I look at 3 School Street and often think, what would I put there? The biggest problem is there's no parking.
Yeah.
So I've been having a hard time coming up with anything that doesn't require someone being able to park there. It's just not a walkable area. And we have that in town with all the investment in Kelly's Corner. And I find myself even sometimes not going to West Acton for things because I know the Village Works, like if I'm going to something at Village Works, I know the lot's going to be full, probably not parking. You go far enough down Mass Ave, you can usually find something, but it's not, a lot of the lots we have are, well, all the lots we have are private lots. It's not a park somewhere and move around that little downtown area. So as much work as we can do, I'm actually happy in many ways that we didn't sell the parking lot because I'm hoping we can move that away from commuter parking that we don't seem to need and make it more of a actual parking around there. Like I go to Concord sometimes and there's a number of public lots that really make a difference. And in the small town I grew up in, that was a big deal. You're not going to go downtown if you don't just circle around forever.
Right. And I think some of it is, these buildings were built at a time when everyone didn't have cars, right? So that's just the reality of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, but a lot of towns have worked around that. I mean,
Right.
you see public lots in every other town.
Right.
And there are a number of places, there's the parking lot for the Christian Science Center. I don't know what happened to that after the building got sold, but there are a number of places that have been informally used like that. So as much as I don't want the town buying things, I think as a source of economic development support, it would be helpful to have that, or just more creation of public on-street parking. But that's something I would love to see, to help move everything more in that direction. Because like I said, I look at all the empty storefronts and I think, okay, well, what would I put there? And I love West Acton, but there's not a lot of stuff that you don't want, that isn't dependent on people being able to come and park. I mean, at least with a salon, people are there for a certain amount of time, but if you're dealing with a store, you want that to have a much higher rate of turnover,
Right.
people coming through. So that's just, from my perspective, one of the things I would love to see looked into further. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Appreciate you both being here.
Thank you.
All right. Next item up is our discussion of the budget workshop that we did with the Select Board on January 10th and 11th. Would anyone like to?
Does it make sense at all to talk about the school budget before, just to include it in the conversation, or should it be kept separate, or how do you want to?
The budget workshop description does not include the school, but it is a good point to include that in our ALG discussion. So staying true to our budget, that was my thought. This also temporarily was furthest away, so we could work our way towards now. What do we think about viewing it over 2 days rather than one long day? Steve?
Yeah, I wasn't keen on the idea of going out 2 nights in a row, not to that anyway. But all in all, I thought we got into more depth. We allowed the department heads more latitude to talk to us than when we try and squeeze it all into one long evening. So I thought it was a big improvement over the last couple of years in that regard. I thought they were all well prepared and for the most part could answer most of our questions. So yeah, I was pretty pleased with it.
Adam, did you?
I actually did like spreading it on 2 nights, even though I don't necessarily like the idea of having to come in for 2 nights. It does help you stay focused and stay fresh. When Steve Barrett was still here, I had mentioned, I wish that our various business entities within the town were shown as business entities, i.e. the fire department, the police department, the DPW, if they would also show the assets there and the cost of those assets, because it's impossible to get a true sense of what does it cost to put out a fire on average, because we don't have any of the costs of the vehicles included, the depreciation included, those things. So that's something I wish we could see in the future, but I know that's not how towns do their accounting. But it would be nicer to be able to see each department as sort of a business entity.
Scott, were you reaching towards the mic? No? Okay. Anyone else? Jason?
I definitely preferred 2 nights to 1. I definitely did not like trying to collapse down in 90 minutes and off you go. Personally, I preferred Saturday, longer day, longer conversation, sort of not having to do a full day's worth of work before sitting down and doing volunteer work. but knowing that that puts more onus on town employees who don't normally work on Saturdays, I'm fine with it being 2 nights. But I do appreciate the breadth and depth of the conversation. It did prompt some more questions. And I am happy to see the greater level of, the greater level of detail in the budget book than we've seen in the last couple of years. So I did think it was, all in all, absolutely a step in the right direction.
Actually, personally, liked 2 nights over a Saturday. I found it was a limited amount of time for me to focus. By the end of a budget Saturday, I was usually pretty burnt by the time you got to the last few apartments. So I didn't like coming back 2 nights in a row, but having that time to think with higher
For
brain
me,
power.
all depended on how long I had to work that day and how far I had to fly.
Yes. I did not have that concern. My one wish going forward would be for more of the information to be presented visually. Each department had wonderful prepared data points. If that just could have been slides so your brain can tick through seeing it there too, that would have helped me retain the data a little more. Okay, next, let's talk about the budget that we learned from that. Anything anyone wants to address specifically
On the municipal
on the
side?
municipal side?
Okay, I would like to strongly recommend, I would refer everyone to last night's revised budget.
Yes.
So the select board met last night, and I don't know who all had a chance to review it during the day today. I'm happy to say I was actually able to review it. My retention of everything that was said might not be ideal, but I definitely ask everyone to look at the first 52 minutes of last night's meeting, because there was a revised town manager's recommended budget with some good conversation and some good questions from the select board members after the fact. It did heavily track with the last ALG proposal from Selectman Martin, the highlights of which are, may I go down these highlights, Madam Chair? I don't want to hijack this meeting. I know I talk too much. The
I'll
highlights.
cut you off if it's too much.
No, indeed, please do. The highlights of which are that the current proposal is a $9.8 million override from the proposal from the select board, of which $2.5 million would be kept in unused tax levy capacity. That is leaving a $7.3 million over and above the 3.19%. I realize I'm mixing dollars and percentage there, but it's intentional. It's another 7.3 million over the Prop 2.5 eligible spend for next year, which is going to be 10+% for the average single-family tax bill. There are elements, so it is important to remember that in this town manager's latest budget, he was tasked by the select board with cutting out $1 million from the declared level services budget. I hate that terminology, by the way, but that's neither here nor there. The vast majority, and he was able to cut out more than that. A fair chunk of it was the 5 full-time and 4 part-time positions that he was willing to cut from the budget. And then a couple of changes. Again, I would like everyone to review the first 51 minutes. While more than $1 million was cut, a fair chunk of it was actually just shifted over to free cash, which is not purely, in my definition, a cut. That is making budget easier, but is not actually a cut. Also, I would like to give a strong shout out to Selectwoman Nickel for asking what I thought was for asking the question that I yelled at the screen when I was reviewing the session this morning, which was how many people would actually have to be laid off for the 5 full-time positions and 4 part-time positions to be cut. The answer to that being, of course, none. There is a new ALG model. There is definitely some new stuff for us to discuss on Monday morning. They went from $2.8 million in new ask to something along the lines of 1.65 million in new ask. It's definitely a change. It's a step forward. I personally, and this is where I need the committee's, or Christie and I need the committee's input between now and Monday. Both entities have now put forward a fresh A budget, which is their definition of an override, acceptable override budget, and a B budget, which is their definition of no override at all. I personally am in the camp that both entities need to be looking at a C budget. I said the same thing at the school committee on Thursday night. I unfortunately was not in person at the select board meeting last night. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Manager already sent out, I believe it was yesterday, a copy of the presentation. No, I'm sorry, it was this morning, a link to it, and is available online to answer any questions we might have about it. If you all want to take a second, or we can even put the slides up on the screen.
Yep, I could put him up, but also if he also could tell us why promoting him to panelist isn't working, that would be great.
I will ask.
Hi, I'm not sure why that's not working, but can you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this for John?
Yeah. I also watched it today on ActonTV, and yes, the first hour is definitely worth watching. And I too was surprised but encouraged that they decided to actually cut deeper than the initial goal. So I think that's a step in the right direction. I too was surprised that the answer to the question of how many existing employees would be laid off was none.
I was not surprised, sir. I was just happy to hear it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm new to this, so I was trying to come up to speed all at once. But one of the shoes that is left to drop is what is the B budget? And I think there was a good deal of discussion during the selectmen's meeting that the difference between pain and harm will only be clear once we see what the B budget looks like and we can compare the two. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
If I may respond, Madam Chair. The first pass of the B budget was presented by the town manager on the initial side. I'd be happy to forward that to you as well.
Please.
It has been stated. I don't believe it's been revised, but yes, I do want to give the town manager absolute full credit for having put out a first pass of what the B budget would look like in the initial presentation from 4 weeks ago or so.
Okay.
So definitely welcome. So glad you're here. And I'm not trying to cut you off at all, but I need to take every opportunity to congratulate the town manager I possibly can.
If I may, Madam Chair, I could just go over the top numbers for those who didn't get a chance to look at it today. The operating budget, which the last time we looked was $40,511,977, has been cut to $39,313,663.
If you want to hold on a second, Christine's
That's not the number I'm seeing.
trying to get it so she can put it
We're at
up.
the top line of the chart.
Which page is that?
That's not the bottom line.
Are you looking at total operations?
Yes, I'm looking at total spending.
I started at the top and worked
What
down to the
slide
bottom. You started at the bottom and worked to the
17.
top.
Slide 17?
Slide 17.
Yes, I have slide 17 in front of me.
So do
Don't
I.
challenge me again on this. Anyway, if you want to go to the bottom line, previously we had 42,502,476, or a 10.3 increase, and now it's 41,001,720, or an increase of 6.39. The actually operating side of it is going up 4.24. The rest of it is in capital. Previously, the borrowing piece was 540,499. Now it's 611,031, and the free cash use was 1,210,000, and now it's 925,000. There are probably about 20 different things that account for the cuts.
So a lot of this highlights my extreme frustration coming out of the budget workshop. I think in the budget workshop, the departments did a wonderful job explaining what they do, how they do it. I have heard a real sense, a real lack of interest in exploring why we do the things we do. I tried to push back on the nursing service, because that's a business that we're in, that other people do as for-profit businesses, that we as a town for some reason are subsidizing. This is my one thing. But there are plenty of others that we're not looking at, why are we doing them? It's really easy to have all these legacy programs that come along. The school has been doing these hard looks. The school is in the third year. When they say level services, they don't even bother to call it level services, because the A budget for the school this year is a real cut. And I don't hear the town having a discussion to convince me that the current use of our money, our taxpayer money, is the correct use. I recognize that the town might not need to cut the budget because it has felt pain in a lot of other ways, but I'm not hearing in any of this, including as part of the budget workshop and a number of the questions I sent in and got responses, that there's a desire to look overall as a community at whether everything we do makes sense. It sounds like we could really use more firefighters. Does that mean we should cut back on some other programs to get there? Then that's not a part of what's happening. I think the town manager sounds like he does a great job getting everything working within the town operations, budgeting stuff well, but there isn't a broader discussion at the select board level or at the public forum level about where we are allocating our resources to reflect what we care about. We talk about this with the schools, and Superintendent Light's budget presentation went into, here are our values for our schools, here are how we support that. We have a variety of our values as a town that we don't openly discuss. It's there in some of the decisions that are made in terms of allocations, budgetary allocations, especially grant money made by the select board, but it's not ever broader, and it kind of feels like once a program gets instated, it's there, which becomes really dangerous because a lot of our programs got instated, not a lot. We have a tendency to get grant money that allows us to create something. And there was the ARPA funding that allowed us to create some programs. We see this with the rental assistance. And this unfortunately happened with the school committee with the cartwheel program. The second you have a program you create with grant money, you need to either expect from the start that you're going to roll that into the operating budget or that you're going to sunset it. But we seem to sort of sneak things in and they go in sideways, which works when we're flush, which we have been for a long time. But I'm looking at this budget and thinking, for me personally, my heating bills have doubled in the last few years. My grocery bills are through the roof. I don't care if my house is worth more, unless I'm going to sell it to go, pay for gas or something. It doesn't help me any. And it's really frustrating for me as a taxpayer and as someone who's trying to keep an eye on keeping this town affordable for everyone, when I'm not hearing a willingness to look at how we're doing what we're doing and whether it continues to make sense. So that unfortunately came out for me out of some of the discussions we had at the budget workshop. I think the budget workshop itself was very well done and it had good information, but I'm finding myself extremely frustrated and having a hard time with this. I have great kudos to the school side and how they are handling the discussion. I'd love to see a shift from where we are, and unfortunately, I think the shift has to come from the select board. It's not anything that we can force or that the town manager is in his position to.
Can I address that?
Please do.
Well, I guess to try to address all the frustrations that you raised. In the first case, we focused on providing visuals in the budget book, and we very intentionally referred to each page in the budget book throughout our presentations, so that as you were listening to us speak, that you could follow along to the data that we've already provided, and hope that you would look at as part of our presentation. So creating an additional PowerPoint slide deck, we can certainly consider doing in the future, but we were really focused on trying to expound on the data that we've already been provided, and hoping to talk more about. With regard to prioritization and, values, every budget we refer to the different policy development documents that we refer to, like the comprehensive master plan, and all the various studies and plans that we've used to develop policy direction that is always approved by the select board and town meeting. The board sets goals every year, which put priorities in place for us to make investments. All of the budget investments are targeted towards those select board priorities. So it's really something that's looked at on an annual basis, and a lot of thought goes into making sure that we're reflecting the values that we believe the community wants us to. And if the community wants us to change the things that we're doing, then they would let us know, and either through the select board or through town meeting, and we would change it. But our goal is to deliver services that residents have asked for and require, and we're doing the best we can to do within the resources available. So the budget workshop wouldn't be a time that we would tell you that wouldn't be our role. That's a role that the select board or others would have, is to say we should stop doing this or cancel this program, for example. That's not what the budget workshop, in my opinion, is for.
Oh, and I agree entirely, John. It was more that it highlighted to me, having looked at all of the information in one place, it highlighted to me that we don't have these discussions. As part of the ALG process, over a number of years, we've asked for various degrees of, cost cutting isn't the right word. The school had this a number of years ago, I'm blanking on it, the idea of a committee that, cost savings, that actually looks at best practices other towns do, et cetera. We, in any sort of public forum that I know of, have not done that approach since I've been paying attention to what happens in town. I know everyone has their special things, but I would love to see, again, just coming out of the budget workshop and the information I got from that, it struck me that there hasn't been a discussion around this. It only comes up because of the budget workshop, in that we're in this very difficult time. So I appreciate that you all did exactly what you were tasked with doing. I would also, in terms of slides, I really like bullet points. It's hard to pay attention to someone, look down on the pages with lots of data, and pay attention to everything. So a basic slide deck would be particularly helpful for me.
Can you pause that for a second?
Yes, certainly. Anyone else have anything? Any questions for John?
One comment.
Yes.
John, my situation may be unique on the Finance Committee in that I'm trying to come up to speed very fast. But I suspect there are a lot of people in town who, over the next several weeks or months, are going to have to come up to speed fast. Most people live here, commute somewhere else, come back home. The last thing they're thinking about is town budgets. So one of the compare and contrasts that I've had over the last few days was in looking at the school meeting over ActonTV. I got a holistic view of the A and B budget together and could compare and contrast. And I understand, and this is not Monday morning quarterbacking, but it would be really useful, not just to me as the new guy, but I think to the community to say, it's hard to evaluate what you're doing with Budget A if I can't see Budget B and compare and contrast.
Jason?
Christine?
I'm sorry, did you want to say something, John?
Sure, yeah, I think the presentation from last night was an abbreviated slide deck. My full budget presentation was on December 18th. And last night was just an update to that. And so I didn't cover a lot of the material that was covered in my initial budget presentation, including some of the cuts that we would consider in a B budget. So I'm happy to go back over that with you offline, if that's helpful.
Yes.
Christine, would you be kind enough to go to slide 10? The other thing that I wanted to point out to the committee is, and I have not yet emailed the town manager. I will do so, although I'm sure he's listening to what I say now, just exactly how many police vehicles are planning on being replaced next year. And then my next question, which I should have asked him after the last budget Saturday and just haven't gotten around to, is how many days out of service were vehicles last year as a result of either recalls, routine maintenance, or actual mechanical failure, which are potentially dangerous to the town. But the purpose of this slide is to point out that 3 out of 4 of these entities are not actually savings, they're just being changed from coming out of the budget and being pulled straight out of free cash. So while it definitely makes the overall budget look better, makes the numbering look better, you're pulling things that had been in the operating budget and pulling 3 out of 4 of them into free cash. Although it was definitely interesting to hear just how many of the select board members were contemplating the concept of jettisoning the 4th of July fireworks in last night's meeting. And yes, I'm a full fan of the DPW crew position being moved to the enterprise fund, back to Mr. Noldy's comments about businesses, sub-businesses in town being treated as businesses. So while I do want to congratulate the million-plus bottom line change that's going to the ALG report, there are certain things that are not actually cost savings. The other one that is potentially not a cost savings, but we need to be aware of, and I will try and make sure that I do things. If slide 12, just a second, please. Slide 12, the last line, the cost sharing with regional school district, $80,000 to $160,000. Yes, it makes the municipal side budget look better, but those dollars are all still being spent, and those dollars are all coming out of the unified tax bill that comes to the individual taxpayers of Acton. Madam Chair, thank you.
So, I mean, the slides, if you wanted to go through the slides, I'm happy to present the whole thing, but the title of that previous slide was reallocations of funding. It didn't say reductions. I wasn't trying to say that we were saving money. We took several different steps in this revised budget proposal to reduce close to $900,000 of expenses directly from the budget, and then reallocate sources to achieve savings in the budget, to change the way we're investing in capital, to maximize the investment. And so, and the bottom line of the budget went down 1.4 million. So results are exceeding what the board asked me to do, which was to reduce the budget by $1 million. And we're going to continue to look at ways to maximize the investments and find external funding sources to potentially bring the numbers down further. So I appreciate the input.
Point received, thank you.
John, looking at their potential new offsets, you have the wetlands filing fees and the cemetery trust option listed as to be proposed. Do you have any idea for a timeline on that, if that does get pursued?
Yeah, so thank you. So that's an example of ways that we would further reduce if we were able to get support from the entities that control those funds. I'm meeting with the Cemetery Commission later this week to see if there's interest in pursuing that. So I didn't want to include it necessarily in the budget until I knew it was going to be supported, and it may not be. So, but that's why it's called potential new offsets. We're looking everywhere we can to try to reduce the impact of the budget next year.
I'm also looking at slide number 12. Could you please tell me what stormwater fees are?
So, currently, we have a Chapter X bylaw which has a stormwater fee program, but it only applies to commercial properties, and it's meant to have users of the stormwater infrastructure help to offset the cost of paying for it. Some communities have actually applied that more widely across the community. I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm just saying it's something that could be considered. In the budget this year, we're investing nearly $1 million in stormwater-related infrastructure needs, and it's an annual investment that's not going to go down. And as you can see, with all the rain and the stress we've had on our infrastructure, more and more of it's going to need to be rebuilt to deal with the newer climate that we may be, planning for. Instead of the 100-year floods are not 100-year floods anymore. They happen much more frequently. So we're going to have to continue to reinvest in our stormwater infrastructure.
Thank you. Anyone else? Steve?
Yeah, just a quick question, John. On the next ALG plan, is the use of free cash still going to be $2 million, or will it be more than $2 million, or less than $2 million?
So, yeah, thank you. I'm actually hoping to get that out to ALG Thursday night or Friday morning, so people can get a look at it over the weekend. But it's going to stay at $2 million in the A plan, and I'm just trying to determine what's the appropriate number in the B plan.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much, John. Appreciate you being here. All right. If there's
Thank
none-
you. Thanks for the input.
Okay, move on to the next agenda item then. ALG. Can you take Jim off? If you hold on one second, I will try to refresh my memory. It has been a while. ALG is meeting this upcoming Monday. It'll be our first discussion since the budget workshops and the school's budget presentation. Actually, a great way to start this off would probably be a discussion of the Thursday's budget presentation that the superintendent made to the school committee. Christine, would you like to guide us through that, or Jason?
Marianne did some printouts for us, which will be really helpful. These are copies of the, oh, you don't have to do that, but thank you. These are copies of the A budget financials, and then she's also going to pass out copies of the B budget financials, which honestly, if I shared them, you wouldn't be able to see them. So we made some printouts. I didn't put them on here. Jason made a comment that it didn't feel as much like a budget as it felt like, sort of a story of where we are and the two possible outcomes that the school is presenting. And it's not very detailed heavy. I assume that will be coming when we have our budget presentation. So there is a document available on the AB website. This is part of it. I cut out all of the, how we got here, other than this one slide in which, they kind of discussed that for the last couple of years, they've done cuts and reductions, reduced over 40 positions. Obviously, we know they had to add some back due to regulations and kids with special needs moving into the district. So driving the gap, we've seen some of this before, the 4.1 million personnel costs, which is broken out more on the next slide, 3 million post-pandemic special realities, special education, health insurance, and then utilities, building and maintenance. And I'm just going to go right to the next slide where it's a little more detail as far as the personnel, contractual obligations, special ed staffing, sub-teachers, reduced savings from extended leaves of absence. Health insurance, obviously, a huge driver. And then even though it's smaller dollars, you can see there's a huge change in special ed tuition, transportation, facilities costs, and assessments. So projecting a $9.5 million funding gap, the superintendent presented an A budget and a B budget. The A budget is not a level funded budget. It still has $2 million in reductions, and it still has significant staff cuts and other budget cuts. The B budget is, if we stay within Prop 2.5 revenues, and find no additional funding for the schools. So what you have in front of you is the details behind that, and then here's just some highlights. So the right-hand column says A budget or B budget. So total budget appropriation for the A budget is a $9 million increase from the previous year. It represents an 8.5%, an 11.4% increase to Acton and a 15.6% increase to Boxborough. The Boxborough Finance Committee member did get up and suggest that he did not think Boxborough would be open to supporting that number, but it was, he was speaking as a member of the Boxborough Finance Committee, but also seeing this, I think, for the first time. With that budget, with the override, with the extra $10 million, basically, $9 to $10 million, they're still looking at 25 staff reductions, because even with that level of funding, they can't maintain the staff that they have now. So services are going to be impacted. It would be the third straight year of pretty significant staff reductions. The B budget, again, is within current revenue. It gives us a 3% increase, and Boxborough 6.77% increase. That's just where we are with the shift in population at this time. And it's just a $1.8 million increase over last year. But it would be 90 teachers and staff. Because they already looked at admin in the last couple of years and slimmed down where they could, there's just not a lot in the administrative section, so it really is focused heavy on teachers and support staff. This budget, just to give a couple of highlights, I strongly recommend going through the book, but just a couple of highlights. This budget means that the junior high loses a whole section, right? They've got 4 colors right now, 4 sections. They would go down to 3. They couldn't support doing that right now. So all of the class sizes would go up significantly. Support programs, it means.
Can I jump in for a
Yeah,
second?
sure.
In case you don't know how the junior high works, for people who are out there, junior high is when all 6
Yep.
elementary schools come into one, and they divide the junior high up effectively into 4 schools. So you're in the same group, you're in a larger school than you've been used to, but you're in the same group. This would involve taking one of those groups away and making it be 3
Yep.
larger schools. So
Just
it's one of the
spreading
ways that we transition the kids over. They get more continuity across the teachers, because within that new school they've created, their teachers get to know each other. It's a better experience educationally for the kids too. So it's not just a simple thing
Yes.
to say getting rid of a section.
Right, exactly. And beyond how that would impact the junior high, it would involve moving kids who are in established elementary schools into other schools. They would need to be consolidating staff and consolidating resources and making classrooms bigger, and they couldn't do that on a school-by-school basis without shifting kids from where they are to where they aren't. So that's something to keep in mind. It's obviously, if any of us have kids in the school system right now, and they were in elementary school, we would not want to see that happen. All of these, A or B budget has increased in fees for sports and activities, right? And, again, it's a comprehensive list that are impacted.
I did appreciate as part of the discussion, specifically when he got into the B budget, the superintendent mentioned a number of changes that have been made in the last 5-10 years that have driven some of where we are. There was the decision to bring all of the schools, elementary, junior high, and high school at the same time. So that was an addition of 10 buses. That is something that could be looked at longer term. So there are a number of things that are on the table for discussion, sort of a reflection of return to previous changes that can be considered. It's, I believe, not a specific part of this rollback, but he brought up a number of things that could be part of a discussion going forward. Another question that was raised is, should we have a broader public discussion about school choice? That is something that we're driving kids all over the place from anywhere to anywhere. Just about something that cannot happen in this scope, needs to be a big discussion if it is had, but something for us to consider as a community.
Can I just ask one question? Sorry, and isn't classroom size one of the major drivers for the rating of the school system?
My understanding is that's why we do much better in some polls and worse in
So
others.
just simply doing this, we are going to degrade the rating of the school system.
Well, one could argue that the rating isn't super worthwhile. It's not a driver in what we do, but the reason that matters is because it has direct impact on the students.
Okay.
Yes, that is a strong reason to consider this. Jason?
As usual, I have a lot to say. I'm going to see if anyone else would like to speak before I try and.
All right, before you jump in with your C budget.
Saw that coming, did you?
I don't get the joke yet, but I'm sure I will.
Before we jump into any budgets, if I remember from the last ALG plan, the gap was $9.5 million. I believe we just got $1.5 million, or close to it, out of the town, and if I factor in the superintendent's A budget, that's another $2 million. Are we now down to 6.5? You're saying no, then where's my math wrong?
Because there's some miscommunication between the superintendent's level services and his A budget. So I don't believe I'd love to see the new ALG spreadsheet, but no, I don't believe we're down to.
Well, we could probably make one here if we wanted to.
Bet you we could, yep.
So can we bring up last time ALG spreadsheet and just look at what the Acton assessment was carried on that number?
While we're doing this, I wanted to mention, because some questions have come in, there is no planned use of E&D as part of this year's school budget, which is different from all previous years. So you will notice also, as part of the ALG spreadsheet, that shows up. Yeah. Okay, Christine is going to bring up the ALG spreadsheet for us. You might also have noticed there is actually something like $300,000 in turnbacks expected, which I was surprised about. We've been told to not expect turnbacks. Goodness knows with everything that's come up, that I wouldn't count on that until we get to the end of the year. Adam?
So regarding the E&D use, I mean, isn't the purpose of having the E&D the same as free cash, is that you use it in the case of an emergency? And isn't the budget problem that we're having right now a real emergency?
They've been balancing the budget with it effectively. And they're not doing that this year, in the hopes that it can be built back up to healthy levels.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's been used in years when there was an emergency, was not an emergency, and now there is, and they're planning not to use it?
Yes.
Doesn't make sense.
They're below the floor.
Your definition of emergency may not be the same. The last couple of years, they've had layoffs. I think for the school department, that's an emergency. They've used some E&D. It's well below the level we'd be comfortable with
Right.
as a town.
Okay. While we pull up the next ALG spreadsheet for potentially a rogue ALG number here, Mr. Noon. Couple things that I would like to just bring forward. In the last Finance Committee meeting, we, meaning Christie and I, were specifically tasked to come back with the next number that we'd be willing as a committee to, we were told that we have to pay attention to the revenue side, and would we please come forward with a number? And we pushed back heavily because we've not actually seen budgets yet. So that's actually why the ALG meeting was not this morning. That's why it's going to be next Monday morning. It was my expectation that we would see a full budget from the school committee. I have gotten used to looking at the budget book from the previous years. While I thought this was a very clean, very well thought out presentation, all 63 slides of it from the superintendent on Thursday, it felt to me more like a position paper than a budget. There are certain hard numbers that I would have loved to have seen. For example, I want to see a year-over-year FTE accounting. I would like to see what savings are as a result of the de-leveling initiative. I would like to see the hard number. Obviously, I'm aware of the fact we have to be very careful about anonymity, but I would like to see a hard number of the students in special education that are out of district. I would also like to see a hard number of the students in the different, I believe he calls them pathways program. I am only aware of the Compass program. I'm sure each school has a different name. This is the level of detail I wanted in Thursday's meeting. I did not get it. What we're tasked to do between now, what Christy and I are tasked to do between now and Monday is to come back with another number. I am woefully unprepared to do that at this time, but I'm aware of the fact that I have to do it because our schedule is so entirely compressed. My plea to you as a committee, and I believe Christy will agree with me, is would you please get us questions for the superintendent as soon as possible? We have to come up, we've been asked to come up with a number, and we've been asked to do it, in my opinion, without the hard numbers that I had anticipated. This is one of those cases where I'd like to say the town came forward with hard numbers. They showed us their A budget, they showed us their B budget, they showed us the number of FTEs that were open, which is part of the reason why we were able to make fun of them for not actually having to fire anyone for next year. So good for them for being honest. I am absolutely aware of the fact that the A budget and the B budget from a town perspective is an inconvenience. The A budget to the B budget from a school perspective is a hemorrhage. At this point, I cannot defend a 10% increase. And so I'm asking the committee to help me come up with hard questions that we can get answered so that we can move forward. Because I have not seen the case at this time. I did stand up and ask for a C budget in the school committee meeting. I know at least one member of the school committee that fell upon receptive ears. I will also tell you there were two other members of the school committee who said, we shouldn't be asking for the 7.5 million number, we should be asking for the full 9.5 million number. We are 6 weeks out from an override, and we are in big trouble as a trio of entities, because we do not have anything approaching agreement about the level of severity and the information required for a town to make an informed choice. Madam Chair.
I can tell you that this process for me has been somewhat depressing. And that might sound obvious to you, but I have had to look at these budgets, and it has become apparent to me that the school's in real trouble. The town maybe has diverged from what I think the priorities are. Neither one of them has demonstrated to me that the budget overrides we're talking about will be sufficient going forward or for how long. I am personally sitting here going, do I need to go back to work? Is this budget override going to change how I parent my children? Because I live here a certain way, and I really was hoping this was my forever home and I was going to grow old here. I don't see a way around this, but I really have to question my faith in the entities and how much what they're saying aligns with what I believe. And I'm finding that very heartbreaking. So if we can, as much as possible, come up with it, given the lack of hard numbers, I know people haven't loved it when we did it before, but from another direction of what we think is an override number that will pass. I think this is a really tough position for absolutely everyone involved. And if this doesn't pass, it's a zero-sum game. If this doesn't pass, I think in some form.
Add.
Sure.
I absolutely agree with you. I think if no override is passed, then it is shame on all of us. But at the same time, neither entity, in my opinion, has clearly demonstrated their desire. And furthermore, I believe that both entities have asked for a true up or a want ask instead of a need ask. And given, if I have to make a binary choice right now, my binary choice is none. That is absolutely not my preference. We've already offered $4 million in next year alone with an $8 million override. We need better data to get there.
So I got here at the right time. I too understand the need for data. I have tried to run a business based on data-driven results for 20 years. And part of that was driven by a really unpleasant experience during the dot-com bubble. When it burst, the dot-com company that I was an executive at had to lay off half of its employees. And half the people I had to lay off are all people I had to hire. It is really hard. Now, what we are facing is a desire for better information. I think that has been a desire that a lot of people would like to have in real life, in their business, in their family budgets, in you name it. But I'm going to say that I have seen enough data, sufficient data, that I think I've, in a pretty short period of time, understand the gap between A and B. And yes, it would be nice to move the goalposts a little. It would be nice to be able to argue this with harder data sooner. That will certainly help in what is going to be a really close call. But I also think we can treat the other boards who are wrestling with as big a challenge as we face, with the best data they can get their hands on today and revise it tomorrow. What I have seen so far is good faith, not obfuscation. And I've seen obfuscation. I promised my wife not to tell old stories because it's like, who cares? But when I was on the Board of Selectmen 43 years ago, yeah, that long, we had a town manager who was trying to slip through on a budget seafaring gear. And as the clerk of the board, I had to say, seafaring gear, excuse me, what are you trying to, excuse me? We have a Navy in Acton? Okay. We have a challenge. It is big. It is ugly. There's never going to be a way to make everybody happy. But boy, we are definitely dealing with what I would call people of good faith who are also trying to wrestle with an extraordinary situation as best they can. And I think, we can too.
Steve?
Okay, so, as I calculated, the ALG gap was 9.9 million the last time we looked, and as of today, using the revised town budget and the superintendent's A budget, that's been reduced by 3.3 million to 6.6. So, to me, we can ask questions till you're all as old as me. We'll get the answers eventually. But as Jason pointed out, time grows short. So to me, it's more a question of, could we live with 6.6? I mean, we at one point said 8, but only 4 in the first year. Are we talking about 8 and 6.6 in the first year, or 1 point something in the second year? Because in the end, that's the decision we're going to have to make. So any questions we have and any data that we require has to get to that question, as opposed to things that will take a lot longer to work through, like the effect on class size on education. I can tell you, I had kids go through the system when class sizes were higher. They still got a good education. I'm not arguing the fact that smaller class sizes are better. How we deploy the town's employees is another long-standing question. And yes, it's been 13, 14 years since we took a hard look at that kind of thing. But those things don't get resolved next week, next month. The question we need to focus on is, we stand at 6.6, we have an ALG meeting on Monday. What's our guidance to our ALG reps?
I agree. We don't have time to get into sort of a broader overview of what should change. One question going into this is, when can that happen? Because we don't want to agree to a number and then everyone goes back to business as usual.
I looked at the ALG plan for FY '26. We're going to have a smaller problem,
Yes.
but we're still going to have a problem.
And Steve mentioned it, I'd like us all to be thinking right now about what sort of excess levy capacity, if any, we want to include in this. And I can't remember if I said, I'm sorry, we've been talking about a lot. I don't understand from either entity whether they could do 3% from here for a while. Or like, would next year's growth, would an override get us to a point where the budgets can naturally grow with growth for a while, and the excess levy capacity would be held for an extraordinary, unexpected situation? Or are they looking at, yes, we need to use it in '26 also? And really, things have changed and we need more than 3% every year going forward.
So I can't answer that question for you, Madam Chair, but the other question you asked is, what does that do for, the question you muttered is, what does that do to the average single-family tax bill, and what does that do to next year's taxes? It would raise next year's taxes to the average single-family by approximately 9.4%, or $1,243 next year alone.
Can you pull up the text? That doesn't. It was 1,300 something.
1,243, if you take cell E. It would take, if you take cell E,
I was actually thinking of what that was in comparison to the this decrease. That
be
has
an
been proposed.
extra $800. 800 more than this. So if you take,
Can we switch?
if you take.
Can you?
No, if you take cell E6 and you add $6,600,000, there you get 15,235.
But the increase is what we're looking at. It's 1,243. And what is that compared to the initial proposal? Was that a 7.5? I can't.
Take the number back out again, so 1,243 versus, it'll be 435, I believe is the number. No, take just zero. Take that number out. 372. So that's what we're looking at as a override, and is that consistent with? It's close. Right, because I'm adding, right. So it's almost an extra $1,000, it's an extra $900 if we go with a $6.6 million override. We're in the 9% range. At least it's single digits. Not to be flippant.
I thought that was one of our goals.
Robert?
I think there's some good advice from a former U.S. Senator who said, let's declare victory and go home. If you're down into single digits, you have your negotiating position for Monday.
Okay, that's what we're hearing. Let's go around the table.
Roland?
I think is what we've discussed before is we don't want to be back in this situation next year go back to it and saying we need more money, right? Have to go back again for another override. Just, we need to, I don't like having an override period, but reality is reality, right? You do 1,243 or 1,248, whatever the number was, you're looking at about $100, it was 103 something per month per average single-family tax bill. If we keep doing this at those rates, a lot of people are going to end up leaving town because you're not going to be able to afford it anymore. When we went through the budget, the one thing that I didn't see any mention of using was any of the stabilization funds that we have. And I think that's something that the town needs to consider. We have money sitting in stabilization, close to $1 million, I believe, maybe a little bit over. And we tax those at a time, we have these projects coming up, we're going to need money when we establish those stabilization funds. Well, we used some of them a couple of years ago, but we need to really look at using those too to help lower the cost right now. The money's there. It's just a matter of utilizing it to its best use.
That goes back to that, are we okay with using one-time monies for operating expenses?
Well, also, we got the memo from, I believe it was a memo from Mary Ann saying that we needed to maintain some degree of reserves for having a good bond rating, because we are looking at a DPW of some form, significant borrowing in the next few years too. This isn't just the operating override right now.
Right, and one of those stabilization funds was for capital. So DPW building will be considered capital.
Yes, but I think that's going forward, not for this year. But yes, I would like to remind everyone that we have another one of these coming soon down the road for debt exclusion.
One thing at a time.
if only.
Are you comfortable with 6.6?
I'm not.
For the record, I am.
Would, Madam Chair, do you mind if we go around the table on this topic?
I would just like a simple, before we do that, because I like bullet points, a bullet point level, what's in that? That is the school's A budget and the town's A budget?
Town's revised day budget
Town's revised budget as of yesterday or today.
as of yesterday.
Yeah.
And,
the superintendent's A budget as of last Thursday.
and you plugged that number into ALG?
And Christine, can you put up what that new tax bill increase would be?
Yeah, can you give me the, did I get the town's reduction? So the town total would be 41,102,476, is that right? Or, sorry, whatever the.
The one from last night?
Yes.
That would be 41,001,720.
And that's,
That's the total spending.
So, sorry, 41, say it again?
001,720. That includes the capital.
Capital, okay.
and that includes use of free cash?
Correct. So capital borrowing is 611,000, free cash is the 925,000.
Okay.
I think, did Adam have a comment? You were raising your hand.
Thank you. Adam?
Thank you, Mary Ann. To Roland's point, I would say, as our ALG representatives, I would suggest that we go back on the stance that anything capital-related in the budget should come out of the stabilization fund, if it's affordable, or if it leaves us in good credit standing, capital-related, because that's what it's there for, that comment. And then regarding, 6.5 million in override, what was the specific cost of just the surprises this year? The health insurance, the special education, and I think there was a third one. Wasn't that around $5 million? Wasn't 5?
Not by my calculation.
I believe that's, well, by Jason's calculation, that's how we got to the 4
4, okay.
initially. But that was with some reallocation of what the entities said was unanticipated, and declaring that they should have been, effectively should have been anticipated. Yes.
And then I just want to remind everyone that our modeling has shown for the last 3, 4, 5 years that the available spending has been shrinking on both sides, right? The have-tos have been growing, and our chart has shown that the available monies that these entities have to find cuts has been shrinking year over year. So their budgets have in practice been shrinking, as other things like increased health insurance, Middlesex, Minuteman, as other things have taken bigger and bigger bites out of the tax assessment. So I'd like to see a functional budget for both sides going forward.
And that raises a good point. As much as I am a huge proponent of Minuteman, it has been cutting into what's available for the town budget. So that's something to make sure we keep in mind also. Adam?
Yeah. I would hate to see my taxes go up by the rate that we just looked at. But I've also been to a number of town meetings and seen the types of things that our town is willing to vote for, to pay for. And I don't think that schools and the town budget are things that they're not willing to vote for and pay for. I like to always say, leave it in the hands of the taxpayers to decide. But we have to come up with a recommendation that's reasonable. So it's hard to say what they'll accept.
Well, the other option is we can play the typical governmental game of kicking the can. You can go for $6.5 million or $6.6 million override and worry about next year. Frankly, with the lack of some information we have, it's pretty hard to predict next year. I can't even attempt it until I saw like the school budget by character code for both the A and B budget, which I asked you for, and you asked them for. So, it's hard to do a forecast the next year out without knowing all the line items in it. You can't even make reasonable assumptions.
I think at some level it is, as Greg mentioned, a question of faith in the entities. And then what I think we've learned to some degree through these various conversations is how much we agree or actually have faith in what we've been told. We're not making a final budget decision here, but we now have a significant amount of data to work with, and this number, whatever override number is going to happen, needs to go before the public soon, and needs to be, there are already people asking a ton of questions about it, and Christine's been on top of the social media. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there about what's happening. So we need to get something that will pass to some degree. I think even with Jason's hawkishness about the budget, he agrees that something needs to happen. There needs to be an override.
And honestly, I mean, I know 6.6 isn't your favorite number. You had 8, starting with 4 to the following year, and we'll see the year after that. Honestly, in the grand scheme of that, a total increase, your 6.6 is kind of.
$600,000 too much.
It's not what you wanted. It's just, I'm just saying, it's in the window. It's just compressed a little.
Okay, there is, however, the very real possibility that we can be trying to come up with the right number, and we may just completely swing and miss. We may sit here and say, we feel that we expect the taxpayer to swallow 9.4% tax increase, and it may get shut down and we're at 0. And I would much prefer we take a larger cut now and have a greater likelihood of surviving than take this risk of having 0. And so I think that 6.6 million in 1 year is too much. I would like to see I personally would like to see the taxes raised no more than 7.5, but that's not going to carry the day.
7.5%.
7.5%, 7.5%.
Not 7.5 million.
Correct. And that's not going to carry the day. I'm aware of that. But 9.4% is too much. And what I would like guidance from everyone on the committee for is, do we do this one and done? Do we do 6.6 million and say we're done? Or do we do an 8 million with a promise of 6.6 in only 1 year? Or is that too complicated to present in front of the town folks?
I think that's too complicated.
Okay.
I mean, once upon a time, this town had 2 weekly newspapers and 2 daily newspapers that could inform the public of all the complicated choices. We don't have that. We're working in an information vacuum.
So are you comfortable with 6.6 one and done, and then there's no coming back for future?
Oh, my guess is I got appointed to this board through 2026. We'll be back.
Wow. If we're back in 2 years, we're going to fail.
Well, this may be a difference in perspective. And so all I can share with you is I got 3 nephews in the Marines, which sounds like a non sequitur, but it isn't. It's relevant. They are trained that if they are 70% confident on taking an objective, go, do it. Because they realize there's always going to be a missing 30%. And when they hit the beach, they'll figure it out. We can't predict the weather 10 days out. So the desire for perfect data, which is admirable, I would love it. Wouldn't it be great to be able to come up with a 5-year forecast? Those went away a long time ago. So yeah, this is the best available data we have, flaws and all. I think we did our due diligence. I know I'm new to this, so my due diligence probably doesn't compare to yours. However, you guys, and I mean that in the, I'm sorry. You've done an admirable job. I'm proud to have joined this group at the last minute. You know what? Damn. You got the number down.
Roland, 6.6, one and done, or 8 million split? Or no, you're not on board with 6.6 either?
Wow, I'm in a spot.
Coming to you next, Dave.
I mean, I think that we're gonna go for 6.6, and we're not gonna have enough the following year, personally.
And not have enough for the following year.
Yeah, that's my initial thought. You know, so more like the 8, but I don't like either. You know, I really wanna,
If we came back to you next meeting and said, we've been asked with 6.6 million for next year, 9.4% tax increase, are you gonna get behind it?
it's gonna be tough.
That's not an answer. Mr. Willinghoff, sir.
That's an answer, it's not the answer you want.
No, it's not a helpful answer.
Yeah, I think just being practical is having a $8 million override versus a 6.6 is nothing, we would start anew. I mean, I don't think you'd practically be able to say, well, we all agreed to only spend 1.4 million in excess for fiscal '26. So I think the question is, should it be 6.6 plus, a potential another override, which seems like almost a certainty going into fiscal '26, and what could we do in between now and then?
Hold on. What do you base that on? Roland said the same thing. What is the sentiment?
Well, I mean, just the practical nature of sticking within, 3% sort of increases. Are we saying that in this inflationary environment, everybody's going to say, okay, we're good with a 2.5% rate increase and some capital spend? I mean, just the nature of inflation in general, I think everybody knows this, is just 2.5% does limit this discussion. So through collective bargaining or whatever, if the numbers are 4 to 4.5 to 5% a year, we're always going to have this issue. And we haven't run into it for a long time because we've had a lot of other ways of plugging these holes, right?
So those ways are gone.
I'm sorry?
So you're saying those ways are gone? We've had 4%.
I just think in this inflationary environment, the numbers that I've heard very roughly from the town and the schools is 4+% average wage increases per FTE. So that's clearly above 3%. So unless that number goes below 3% next year, we're going to run into this challenge again next year.
And every year going forward. That to me is a big
No,
structural
perhaps.
issue. But that becomes a question of why am I supporting 6.6 if it's not going to do it?
I've suggested a couple times of just talking more about fiscal '26. I think it is a big can of worms. We don't have all the information we want in front of us. I'm simply saying as a practical reality is an override in fiscal '26 is likely, much more likely than not, in my view. I don't think I'm in the minority in that. Anybody who thinks, salary increases in a service-based economy is going to 2.5% in the next year, I just don't think so. So I mean this all just from the political angle of should it be 6.6 million, one and done, meaning just one, not done, and then revisit the question for fiscal '26 at some point in the next year, or if we throw out 8 million and then we use 8 million or something else, and we just have the same discussion. It's, so anyways, that's my sort of diatribe just on the 3 versus 4%. I mean, I think to sum up what we talked about with the school and the town budget pretty simply is, if it was level service, minus 2 million from the schools and 1.5 million from the town gets us to this 6.6 million. I think we all have those numbers right? And the number, at least I have in my math, is a 9.7% increase in total spending. So that boils into, the average tax bill in some form or another through that math. I'd say as a practical necessity, I mean, I do understand the school has made cuts for 2 years, and additionally, the A budget here has additional cuts. I'm just not as convinced on the town side, just be practically for the reasons you've mentioned and the additional, sort of services that have been provided over the years that have sort of been very sticky and stuck there for a while. And I do appreciate the work as the town managers put forward of taking $1 million out and so on and so forth, but it just feels to me that there's probably more wood to chop there. And so, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think some good efforts have been made so far. Me personally, I think more can be done, but I'm willing not to quibble too much over getting to be what would probably likely be pretty small numbers, I think, at this point. And again, I'll just circle back to the context of the health insurance trust and the special education, is that if that number is about 4 million and we're talking about going to 6.5 and 6.6 million, just pretty generically, that extra 2+ million is probably about that excess in pay increases for all those FTEs getting 4% raises a year. So that's probably pretty reasonable in this inflationary environment, in my view. So, long-winded way of saying, I think that we could probably do better than 6.6, but I'm not willing to push too much harder on it at this point. I think, these are relatively decent numbers, but I'm 99% convinced we're going to have this discussion again 9 months from now with less urgency and maybe more ability to revisit a lot of these items without having the pressure to have a decision made and socialized and voted on and so on and so forth. So that's my view. I think 6.6 is reasonable, and I say that primarily with 4% cost per FTE out there. That's a bigger number. I mean, we skirted around that with the schools, and the superintendent was a little coy about whether it's 4 or 4.5%. That's how I understood it. He did not say that. That's just what I heard in not answering the question directly. But John in his answers said it was about 4%. And I think for the teachers, it's reasonable to be 4-ish. So that to me is the delta of what we're talking about here.
Thank you. Mr. Nolde?
Given that we're the entity that's supposed to plan for the future, I like the idea of an $8 million override and spend, say, $6 million this year and leave some untaxed levy capacity. However, that's complicated. Also, I think that we have a history of untaxed levy capacity being taken off the table rather quickly as soon as people realize it's there, thinking it's to be spent. So the short answer is I think I would support a single-year override and hope that that increase, which then becomes in perpetuity, is hopefully enough excess capacity for some of the later years.
So far, I'm hearing a 6.6 million one and done for 0 votes, 0 votes for $8 million with a 6 million for a single year, and a 6.6 with a future override of 3 votes. Am I mischaracterizing what you just said?
I don't remember saying anything about a future override.
So you're saying 6.6 million with no future override. You're in the 6.6 million and done category. Very good.
I thought, Dave, did
I say that right?
Dave, could you quickly summarize what you said?
Yeah, mine was a long answer. Just to be clear, we don't have any position, obviously, on fiscal 26. I just think it's a practical reality. We'd likely revisit that. So 6.6, that's it. There's no caveat that Dave's okay with an override next year or anything else like that, and let's get started working on that,
Sure.
If we had ranked choice voting, we probably could.
I guess I would go with the 8 million with the leaving the tax, ability to tax more, because I just feel like we're going to get something unexpected. This health insurance increase was unexpected. So,
Every year's a snowflake, as I
Yeah.
was told. Mr. Noon, we're coming to the center of the table. We'll end with the chair, as we always do.
Microphone. Tell everybody else.
I would go with a 6.6 override for this year, and I'll worry about next year. The higher we push the override number, the higher the risk we have of failure, and I cannot tolerate seeing this thing go down.
Greg?
I agree.
Christine?
Yeah, I like that we used the data at hand and found a number based on the math that we can then go out into the community when we're talking about overrides and we're educating the public how we got here and why we're here. And I think it's a number that we can, I think it's a number that can pass. And I think it's, meets the need.
For my part, I hate all of them. Go ahead, Christie.
I really hope, and I suspect at the end of the day, that I can vote for this override, but this is changing my life. $100 a month matters. I'm not going broke, but there are things I'm not investing in my family at $100 a month. And I said on top of my heating bill has more than doubled, my grocery bill is up a ton, and talking inflation, income has not. I think we're getting 3% annual cost of living adjustments, which is not keeping up with anything. So this is significant. I am not at all comfortable with giving any excess levy capacity. I want to be proven that every single dollar spent going forward is absolutely necessary at that time, when people have the reason to tell me what they want to be spending the money on. I don't like this number, but I think it's necessary.
Between 4 and 6.6, do you have a sweet spot?
No. What I will say is, if they're telling me 6.6, they can probably get me on board with 6.6 with the absolute insistence that there is a stronger look and discussion publicly about our programs that we're spending money on going forward.
We didn't get that this year when we had the leverage.
No? Well, we still do to some degree.
We got 6 weeks. Aye.
Adam?
Well, it's not just us that have to be convinced of that, it's the public, right? And so the time for that presentation is at the town meeting when they're asking for the well, I guess prior to town meeting, right? Because it has to go to the.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
Which does remind me, it was a suggestion, Madam Chair, that was made to me by a member of the public, that maybe we ask the town moderator to put up any pro and con arguments rather than a week before town meeting, at least a week before the ballot initiative. And so I think it would be appropriate for you as the chair to make that request. So sorry to put an email homework on you, but I thought that was a good suggestion from a town's member. I'd like you to please follow through with it if the rest of the committee concurs with that sentiment.
I'm also aware of an effort to try to put together a special event at ActonTV that would take a look at the pros and cons. I know the town does a great job and the schools do a great job communicating, but I think one of the things that I've learned just trying to come up to speed quickly is there were hundreds of people the other night watching board meetings. It's like, they got Netflix and they watched board meetings. So guess what? I think there are ways to communicate this, and I think we're doing it one of those ways right here.
I would say so the committee is 6.6 million,
One and done.
one and done.
That's what we say.
I floated the idea of insisting on cost savings, or at least a significant look at what we're spending money on now. Is there any other desire for that?
I agree with you.
Yeah, Mike.
I agree with you.
Adam, you're making face.
I just wanted to point out that remarks that I've heard in the school committee meetings from, administration, Peter Light and his crew regarding structural changes needed, which were the structural entities that were sort of built up over the years prior to Peter, and he and his administration and the school committees that we've had in the last 3 years have done a tremendous job to help out with that, I think. And so I feel like I've developed a great sense of trust in that administration and what they're doing, as well as in our town manager and what they're doing on that side as well. I do support the idea of getting always more information and more transparency, but I do have a general level of trust in the two entities at the moment that I developed over ALG the last 2 years.
To be clear, the superintendent specifically stated, looking at some of the programs, when level busing, Time Start for everyone was introduced, it was supposed to save money. It is very much not. Or rather, he thinks significant money can be saved, potentially, by moving away from that, and mentioned the concept of looking at that. So I would like to know that more things like that are being explored and more programs like that at least looked at on the town side.
Yeah, so just, he talked about Conant, whether it stays open or not. He talked about school choice, which would cost more before it costs less, because we would be busing kids all over the place for a while before we got them transitioned. And he talked about busing in the end. If we went back to 2 levels, we would be able to cut 7 to 10 buses, which would save us money. So he had a list, and I would like to see a similar list on the town side that we could look at.
Madam Chair, and we are looking at health insurance solutions that would avoid this problem ever happening again. So.
All right, I'm comfortable with what we have to go back to ALJ. Are you, Jason?
Indeed.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm going to say we're not going to look at the point of view.
I would like to just sense of the committee real quick. Okay, the point of view is clearly that we have some budget issues and that we are going to need an override. And rather than going in front of the public and presenting a point of view, it makes more sense to me that we pivot to outreach, where we go to different community centers and we explain what we're talking about in a neutral, here's how it works sort of way. Because right now, a lot of the members of the public are getting their information from Facebook, and they're getting their information from anybody in Acton or Boxborough who logs onto Facebook and has things to say about it. So we should be more proactive. And one of the things that was brought up was some woman was like, I just need the Cliff Notes. I've got kids. I can't watch a 3-hour, meeting to find out what's going on here. And I struggle to come up with Cliff Notes for something that's really complicated. So if we could have a story time at the library paired with a here's what's going on for the parents and other things at True West and at, the senior center and in every way we can to get out the community. Instead of the point of view, it's what is this? What is it going to mean? How's it going to affect my tax dollars?
We cannot use government resources to promote.
I don't want to
an
promote.
override.
Just literally it has to be a flat education. It cannot be promoting an override. It would just be, how does it work? What does it mean?
We have to discuss with town council
Sure.
where that line is.
Absolutely.
We can do anything before the number's finalized, is my understanding.
We can also do anything we want in public meeting. We can advocate for it or against it in public meeting as a public entity.
Adam?
I think the word Cliff Notes is key here, and I think you can summarize this in a single slide by just putting up the bullet points of here's the unexpected costs that we've been hit with, here are the cost-saving measures that both entities are taking, and here is what it's going to cost after those measures, and the Finance Committee supports this as an alternative to a horrific alternative of not passing any of it, and having to completely gut both entities.
The second you got to that last sentence, I think you violated campaign finance. We as public entities are not, as part of campaign finance law, allowed to use public resources to promote It might be a ballot measure, can I?
We're allowed to say we recommend it.
Right.
We are in meeting.
No, even in public, we're just not allowed to have it appear to be a campaign of any kind. So if we have a public statement that this was the final this is the final recommendation of the Finance Committee, that is allowed to be posted. It just cannot appear to be a campaign flyer of any kind.
Well,
I'm
can I then suggest, one of the things that I tried to do to come up to speed quickly was go to the Finance Committee website. And what I found was a presentation from 2022.
Yeah, this is an ongoing IT-related argument.
Pardon?
We have been trying to fix this for a few years.
Do you need someone to?
Please figure out who to talk to. The slide is in, if you search for it, it is available
Yeah,
on the website. It's just, we can't get it posted there.
I'll take that on.
Please, thank you. That would be greatly appreciated. I'm sorry, back to this. I would think that going and giving presentations in support of an override would qualify as a campaign.
Giving presentations would, but having a posted declaration of
Yes.
our recommendations totally allowed.
No?
No, sorry, I mean, the people need education on what is Prop 2.5, what is in my tax bill, what is an override, and, you know, what are each entities presenting as their budgets? Not, you know, if they would like to know more, they can watch our meetings, whatever, but I'm talking about, there's a lot of, people don't know about how it's gonna work at the ballot box, how it's gonna work at town meeting, where to show up, when to show up. It needs to be a very specific, detailed list of things, and I'll try to draw it up and not violate campaign
Well,
finance.
and one question is whether we simply draw it up without the numbers. Here's what it is, here's where you go to find
Sure.
the exact numbers. Adam?
Yeah, so I guess the real difficulty here is the timing of, you know, we would normally make our statement as to why we recommend or don't recommend something at town meeting, but what we're trying to say here is that statement needs to be made before the ballot.
What I'm hearing is we need two statements, potentially. We need I'd been thinking going into this year that we needed just to educate people on how Prop 2.5 works. And then we need effectively a short POV on why we support an override.
Which we can run through the office, that we were given the web address, run it through that office, present it through ActonTV, and have it be part of what the town moderator posts.
Okay. As much as possible, I'm feeling prepared for our next ALG meeting. You better not be about to.
No, I move to approve all of the minutes
Thank you.
in Christie's email to us.
Second.
All right. We have no one remote, so we can do this as a just by hand vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, thank you. Any quick liaison reports? Emphasis on quick. No? Okay. ALG meets on Monday. And our following meeting is, because of the way the month is set up, it is scheduled for February 13th. We'll have to decide whether we think that is sufficient or want to try to have a meeting on the 6th, which would be 2 weeks out from now as opposed to 3.
2 weeks is better than 3.
I agree, given what's going on. Are people comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay, I'll get us a room for the 6th if we can't be here.
As part of the hazing process, I've been told that the new guy has to move.
Please don't.
Wait.
Please do not yet.
You're right, but wait.
It was hazing.
So I'm going to schedule our next FinCom meeting for the 6th.
So we're moving the one from the 13th to the 6th.
Yes. Keep the 13th penciled in. I'm going to keep the room for the 13th.
In case the fit hits the shan.
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry. That's the wrong button.
Okay. So 7:30 PM, I'll tell you where that is on February 6th will be our next meeting. Anything else? I believe that's it.
I move the meeting is adjourned.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? All right, thank you. Good night, everyone.